hundreds of passengers, including Canadians, who have just been through a harrowing ordeal. That ship, the Viking Sky, lost power and was stranded just off the coast of Norway, but it has finally made its way to port, no doubt to the relief of those passengers still on board. At this point, we can tell you at least 17 passengers suffered injuries after the vessel was tossed by powerful waves. Well, there were among hundreds more passengers who have been airlifted from the Viking Sky within the last day. Some 500 people were hoisted from the ship, the cruise line saying travel arrangements have been made for those brought to shore, the first of whom are leaving today. But for those who are still on board, here is where they are arriving from the place where the ship stalled off the western coast of Norway. It traveled down to the city of Molde, and that is where the remaining passengers and crew are right now disembarking. About a third of the passengers were already back on land after being airlifted by helicopter one by one, some of whom are now sharing their stories of their rescue and what it was like to be on board that thrashing ship.
Furniture would slide across the room, slide back, and with it came people and glass. It was a very dangerous situation, frankly.
The guy came down from the helicopter, one of the Coast Guards, snapped my belt and said, "Hold it," and shot me up about 100 feet in the air and onto the helicopter.
We were talking about Jan Trubergen, and he joins us right now from Molde, Norway. So Jan, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure.
You know, I realize you've been through such a harrowing ordeal, as we say, for the last 24 hours or so. So how are you doing right now?
Oh, I'm doing very well, thanks. I wasn't one of the 17 injured. We've been taken very good care of, both by the Viking crew as well as the Norwegian rescue services. And frankly, the people here in Molde have been tremendously welcoming to us.
Mm-hmm. So when did you realize the ship was in trouble?
When we lost power, I knew that there was an issue, but I think the moment of concern for me came when they started actually handing out life jackets and talking about helicopters being on the way. That was quite a moment in my life.
And how far in did that happen? Because to my understanding, you were watching a movie on the ship when you lost power, made your way to another part of the cruise ship itself. And at what point, you say when the life jackets were being passed out, but was that right away when you arrived where other passengers were gathering, or was that a little bit later on?
If you've never done a cruise, or some people listening may never have done so, one thing that's a requirement is when you get on the cruise ship, you have to go through a mock muster drill to learn where your stations are, to learn how to wear life jackets and so on. I've done a few cruises, and normally it's just kind of a pain to have to go do it, but we realize it's a legality. Now I'm glad we did it. After I left the movie cinema, I realized there was no power in the ship. It was running on emergency lighting only. So I made my way to the cabin and met my friend Beth Clark. We made our way downstairs, and suddenly the alarm went off. We realized we were supposed to go to our muster stations. While we were there and they started passing out the life jackets, the ship started really rocking, and you could see tables, people, you name it, rocking back, sliding back and forth. I'm not sure what degree the ship was listing, but it was enough that large objects were flying around the room.
Large objects, and what about, sorry, Jan, sorry to interrupt, but large objects, as you say, but what about people? Were they being tossed around?
Large objects, absolutely. It was a little bit like what being in a blender must be like. The one thing that really caught my attention was when we heard loud crash of glass and a lot of people started screaming. Didn't really know what was going on from our side of the ship, but we could see over there, and as it turned out, the windows to the outside had been broken out by the ocean, and seawater was pouring in. That caused some injuries, I'm told, by itself. One lady whom we had become acquainted with received a compound leg fracture, and I think she may have broken both legs when that occurred.
Mm-hmm.
Some other injuries. I think it's amazing there were no fatalities. I really do.
Well, it is really quite amazing, because as you are speaking, we've been showing people at home some of the video that people have been posting onto social media, some of the images they've posted on social media. We saw at one point water rushing into an area where passengers were sitting with their life jackets on. Were you ever fearful that the ship was going to go down?
probably should have been more fearful of that. We were blowing rather quickly towards some towards a rocky shore, and I didn't realize how quickly we were moving. Fortunately, the crew of the Viking was able to get one engine running and get the anchors out in time to stop that. Had we hit those rocks, it would have been a much uglier story.
Well, and you were evacuated, and that's important to note because how you were evacuated was one by helicopter. Tell us what that was like, because that must have been equally as scary.
Yeah, they had us they had us walk from our muster stations to the stairways, and then we stood on those stairways for probably 2.5 hours. People behind me, I'm sure, much longer than that. We didn't know what was going on until we finally realized they were first taking off the injured. And an injured person, obviously laying in a litter and so forth, it's going to take up a lot more space. So we were there for quite a while with the ship rocking back and forth. But we didn't know how we were being evacuated. I frankly had the impression I was going to walk out on deck, jump onto a helicopter. When I walked out and saw that big bird sitting up there, I don't know, 60, 80 feet. I'm not very good at measuring, but it was high. And I just saw a rope coming out of it. And I said, I got to go up there. They said, yes, you do. It was a little scary. It was.
Scary.
No, that's a lie. It was a lot scary, frankly. But they were very, very professional.